Thank you for joining us on Health Diary. My name is Gladys Gashanja, and today we're coming to you from the 4 Points by Sheraton here in Hurlingham. Now, we are all bound to experience loss and grief at some point of our lives, whether it's the loss of a relationship, the loss of that job, or even the loss of a loved one, or even a pet. I mean, that list is long enough, but this is just life. But what distinguishes us is how we grieve. So the question is, how come some people have a hard time dealing with loss and the grieving process becomes a bit more complicated for them? We answer these and other questions right after this fact of the matter. Grief is a reaction to any form of loss. The grieving process can vary from one person to another, informed by background, beliefs, and relationship to what was lost. No one way of grieving is better than the other. However, prolonged grief without improvement of the symptoms can dominate and even interfere with a person's life.
Being grown in a family whereby we had family feuds between my dad and mom, they both separated, and there was everyone was like drawing me to their side. So I ended up going to the streets, whereby I became a street kid for a while. I was at the age of 5 or 6 years back then. I used to go and steal from one place, one shamba, and this shamba was also for some mother who ended up becoming my aunt later on. She introduced me to her children. She told them that I'm one of them. They should treat me well, and I thank God because I got, at least I could have a family whereby I could reside. They provided a roof, they gave me food and everything. But then she passed on in a road accident some years later, and then that's now where I experienced loss, because she was the only person that I had. I've never accepted, or I've never come into terms with her death. I ran away from there also because of the family feuds. Each and every day walikuwa naleta issues hapa na pale. She was the only person I had. Anytime I had an issue, yeye tu ndio nilikuwa naenda tu nakimbilia na mwambia. Sasa sina msi. Close myself up in a room, just cry the whole day. Up to now, trust me, anytime I'm alone, that's just what I do. And it's been like 10 years, 11 years up to now. Hadi saa hii time nachukuanga tu simu najaribu call, number is not going through, like najaribu tu kuangalia picha zake. The only thought that I had was suicidal thoughts. The only thing that helped me, it is talking. Like talking to friends, talking to teachers, not necessarily talking about what I'm going through, but talking other issues. So because zilikuwa zinani help ku carry away zile thoughts zenye nilikuwa nazo. The denial stage really took long for me to accept that it happened. For me, coping strategy ni kwamba I just want to be busy. It's very okay not to be okay. Kabisa, that's yani mtu tu understand hiyo. Kama si wanaume, it's very rare for us to talk to people. Unaona ni kama ni weakness. Like mimi kama mwanaume kwenda kufungulia maybe dem ama boys mwenzangu ile roho, like yo mazee, I'm going through this, unaona atakuona kama inferior. No.
So loss and grief is part and parcel of life, but we all experience it differently. So let's understand how to cope with it. To help us along is Elsie Mwangi, who is a loss and grief therapist, and we are also joined by Winnie Njogu. Thank you for your time. And it may seem obvious, but it is important that we actually define loss and grief. From your experience, Elsie, what is it?
Loss is that context of having been deprived of something or someone. Grief is the emotional, psychological, mental, functional, behavioral responses towards the loss.
Okay, so the other thing I think that is important to establish is that loss and grief is not only associated to death. It can also involve other things, right? Exactly. Talk more about this.
Especially in this COVID period, we have found ourselves having lost too many things other than the conventional loss that we know. We've always looked at loss as that one of having lost a loved one. But now we found ourselves having lost jobs, having lost celebrations, having lost endings in terms of when we lose a loved one. Normally we used to plan for funerals and we used to go, but now curtailed. The most that can attend a funeral, I think now it's between 30 to 50. We used to go a whole family. Now that ending part is no longer there. We have lost a sense of self. Some of us used to define ourselves with other things that we have achieved as we grow up. For example, if I ask someone, tell me about yourself, you'll tell me about your education, where you work, your title. Those are the things that we used to define ourselves with. Now we have lost jobs, so who are we? And there are so many other losses around that. And most of them that have come with COVID itself, other than death, we may look at them as secondary losses.
So now that we've established what loss is and how it's experienced differently, Winnie, you join us today because you recently experienced loss. Tell us more.
In July last year, on 11th, I lost my mom-in-law, and I lost my sister-in-law, sorry. And then on 24th, my mom-in-law also passed away. So it was during I think the peak of COVID. It was really a tough time because we, like Shah said, you really don't have time to grieve or mourn or maybe experience the loss, like where maybe it's a week of mourning and maybe people come. This one is actually you, the family members, who need to go source for everything. And then you have to bury them so quickly. Your kids are not really even in the picture to maybe see. And then you're also avoiding other elderly people from maybe contracting the COVID. You really don't get to let the grief sink in or the loss sink in.
Okay, so Elsie, how do you know someone is grieving?
Yeah, we have different symptoms of people who are grieving. Some of them may find themselves in denial and they may even verbalize it. No, it hasn't happened. Shock, some people also get to numbness, and that numbness helps the body to take the loss little by little, bit by bit. Others may become violent, others become angry. For others, they withdraw to process it on their own. Others may want to have themselves within a group, something that did not happen, especially during the COVID period. As she has said, it was not possible to mingle with people to help us in support, in terms of support system. So we found ourselves kind of withdrawing. You also don't know what those other people how those people will take you. There was a lot of stigma that is still there. It's not really over yet, but it has been tough in terms of that, and also the people the significant others, the support system that we expect to be there for us did not know how to handle it. There was a lot of fear also that, yes, so-and-so has passed on because of COVID, so how do we go there? Do we even go there? So many things happening.
Okay, she talks about how people grieve differently. Which ones do you identify with?
The numbness. I think the deciding like it has not happened, or you decide we are going to move on with life the way it is. We'll deal with this later. And deciding not to, when you hear somebody talk about it, you don't want them to mention them. Or somebody calls you and tells you, oh, Pole, you don't want that. You want people to assume like it's normal, let's go on. Yeah, because talking about it makes it real.
And you mentioned you have a daughter who kept asking where they are. So how did you deal with that?
Well, I think that was the hardest part. That is what actually took me to counseling. Because she's 5-year-old. Ever since she was born, she's been with these two people every weekend. and sometimes months in their places, in their house, staying with them. So with the kid, she knows like it's family, their family. And the last time they spoke, they had told her to pack her bags. They are coming for her for that weekend. Now the kid was left with the fact that they are coming. And here you have to tell her they died. Now, I actually stayed for 3 months without telling her. Because with the COVID, it was a COVID death, so we had to stay away. That is what made me go for counseling, because I really needed to know how to deal with a 4-year-old who has lost very significant people in her life. And the easiest thing was maybe to tell her they have traveled, but she would think, how are these people this bad? And why can't I video call again if they are traveling?
Elsie, it brings in this perspective of children also, you know, grieving losses. How do you handle that?
For a 4-year-old, understanding death is very difficult. But then with children, what we do is that we pick the cues from them. How much do they know about death? Then work from that. Yeah. For example, when they are watching cartoons, maybe in their cartoon programs, they found one character dying. So how was that to them? Then pick it from there. Again, when it comes to explaining to children, you pick age-appropriate wordings. When you tell them they've traveled, they will remain hopeful that when you travel, you come back. So when is Shosho coming back? If you tell them they went to heaven, then to them, they grow up hating heaven. How did heaven pick my loved one? If you tell them they are in a better place, they know no other better place than home. So which is this other better place? If it is about God picked them, they go to Sunday school. They are told God is good, God loves us. So who is this God that is so unfair? He loves me, then takes my loved one. So there are so many questions with children. And when one is not able to take through a child, we have child therapists that can help the children process the loss, which makes it easier for them other than complicating it with giving inappropriate information.
Okay, which brings me to a question that was put across. Those grieving the loss of their loved ones, of course, especially the terminally ill, may mourn and then somewhat feel relieved that they have passed on. What is that?
The anticipatory part. In such a state, we are conflicted. We are at an in-between space of letting go and keeping hope alive. But then we get stuck. We have the thoughts, but until it happens, there is nothing we can do.
So have we seen a lot of anticipatory grief during COVID especially?
It has been there, but it has been denied. We do not want to face it because in the African tradition, you don't anticipate death.
At this point, we take a short break. When we come back, let's talk about the coping mechanisms. Stay with us. Welcome back to Health Diary. My name is Gladys Gashanja. Today we are discussing loss and grief and understanding how better to cope with the same. We still have Elsie Mwangi, who is a loss and grief therapist, and of course we have Winnie Njogu, who has experienced loss and of course grief. And Winnie, losing 2 relatives almost at the same time and to the pandemic is a huge blow. What were the coping mechanisms? You said you went numb, but how are you coping?
I used to stay with my now dad-in-law, my brother-in-law and my husband. We used to stay there, so I could take care of everything. It used to be easier because you don't have time to pity yourself. And then you take charge of I took charge of doing everything and then went back to work immediately. Yeah, that one also became like an escape. I'm escaping from the whole reality of the fact that something has happened. And I think I really avoided anybody who called me and told me about pole. That was, I don't know, I didn't want that part. At some point, I could not breathe. Maybe I'm just with somebody, we're okay, but I feel like my chest is so heavy. I found I have a friend, I used to call her a lot, like for hours. That would make me get back to my normal self.
All right, they talk about at times you think you're coping with it, then you get bouts of anger, outbursts. Did you ever experience that?
I could be okay. We are seated with people. I'm going on with my normal things, but I could find maybe I'm shouting at my kid for something that is not really a mistake, or maybe it's a mistake but doesn't warrant my outburst. And then also we could be talking with people and I could shut down and maybe leave and go because I just shut down.
Now, there's no one way of grieving, that can be said this one is better than the other. But what are the stages that point to quote unquote normal grieving?
The commonly known process, the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But then the griever would find themselves in, today I'm in denial, tomorrow I'm at acceptance, today I'm bargaining. So the stages tend to confuse the griever more. So what I would emphasize as a loss and grief practitioner is working with what is working, as long as it is healthy. We are very good Africans in talking, and we've been socialized to resolve issues intellectually. So we talk so much, give very innocent statements that are intellectually very accurate, but emotionally barren. That when we tell someone, Pole, and maybe this person called me in need of some form of support, and then I say, Pole, I have crushed that person. Because for me saying Pole, it's like there is nothing I can do. And their hope is on me.
So you should wait to hear what they need.
Wait to hear what they need.
Okay.
Again, something else that happens is that even friends avoid the grievers because we do not know how to handle them. So in that cycle, we lose relationships.
Okay, and I'd like to hear from Winnie. What are some of the things, apart from the Pole, that you didn't want to hear, that was said to you and you were like, I wish you knew how much that hurts?
The words I understand. I don't know if anybody understood, unless maybe if I could have heard it from my sister, yes, maybe I could say she understood. Or maybe somebody telling you again, like, it's all God's plan. But they were not old. How is it God's plan? It might come from a good place, but they are not just good words to tell someone.
As Elsie is saying, they're emotionally barren.
Yes.
Okay. How do we define the positive and negative coping mechanisms?
So what is important is to look at, yes, this is the coping mechanism now. But the support that is around, the people around need to support this person so that whatever mechanism that they are using is not harmful in the end. For example, those who respond to loss violently, we don't have to let them get violent because they may harm themselves or those around them. That may lead to other losses.
Now, Winnie, you said you sought counseling. At this point, what led you to it, apart from the fact that you needed to explain to your daughter?
With the stages she's mentioned, I was trying to see myself if I'm going through any stage. I realized I'm in shock. I'm just somewhere. I'm not anywhere. I'm just somewhere. I'm not processing anything. I'm not dealing with anything. I'm not doing anything. That is when I thought I needed somebody to like get me through it or see if I'm okay. I might think I'm okay, but fall into some place where I don't want to be.
Did it help?
Yeah, it really helped. It really gave me a different perspective of what of what grief is, and that it's aishi. I just have to learn to live with it and deal with it as it comes every day. Yeah, I have to keep things like gratitude journals, maybe write letters to them if I feel like it's something I need to tell them. Like, it gave me a way to deal with it.
Elsie, how long is too long to grieve?
There are no time frames in grief because we are also unique. Our personal traits also inform how we grieve. But then we need to be careful that the grief doesn't turn into prolonged or complicated grief, because that may also graduate into PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders. Because with time, the frequency of the bouts reduce. So that after some time, you may find that maybe they are coming maybe once a year, or even you can go for a year without the bouts coming. But that does not mean you no longer love the person who died.
So are we saying you can never, ever totally recover from grief?
It is possible to recover, and the recovery requires active participation in the process. Without commitment, then even the practitioner who is taking you through, there is nothing much that they can do.
You are not mourning in isolation. There are family members who are also going through this. So, for example, your husband, your sister, how are they coping? Are they in the better place? Are you helping each other along?
None of us was really dealing with it in the same way. All of us were doing it differently. And we find like today somebody would really talk about mom. And when they talk about mom, we know this person really needs us to be like to call, to maybe keep them going, like to tell them like it's okay, or maybe to just call and talk about some other different things, just to show them you're there.
I think, as we are saying, self-awareness, knowing what you need and communicating it, normally is the hardest part for most people. So how do you do it?
Unfortunately, in times of crisis, what we know about ourselves may not really work. But then, when we find that who we are and what we know is not working, and when it is not working, help is out there. There are therapists, maybe as she has been sharing with a friend. The friend may realize, I'm also limited. I cannot help. So now can I find help for my friend? Again, when it comes to the family, she has said that all of them are grieving differently. Is it possible for the family to have a sitting, at least to hear, and not assume that, yes, we are grieving differently, but how is this one doing it? How is this one doing it? How can we then connect and see when we need to grieve together and when we need to grieve in isolation?
Elsie, I came across a word here, disenfranchised grief. What is this?
When I talk about the secondary losses, especially with COVID, we've lost people, yes? So we grieve the loss of the person and not grieve the loss of that relationship. So the loss of the relationship has been ignored. It has been disenfranchised. For miscarriages, people will say, after all, the child was not born. But then there was a heartbeat. The child was loved and is still loved. It is a process of grief that is happening amongst those that were attached to the child.
Okay, so even as we bring this conversation to a close, Winnie, we're here to learn how to cope with grief. You have walked in these shoes. What's your clarion call for those that are walking in your shoes?
We should all go for counseling. But we are Africans, we always demystify there. We say it's not for blacks. Just find yourself. Maybe you say to be aware of yourself, and then now seek guidance wherever you need to seek it, if it's from your parents, from your support system. And if you get a professional, that would be so much better.
Elsie?
When we find ourselves there, that is when we realize this thing is not as I thought. But with practitioners out there, we are open and we are there to help. Again, I think it is important now to sensitize people that it is important to have these conversations. Because as much as we say that death and tax are sure, I think loss should be the third one. Because we all experience loss at one point or the other. And again, no one teaches us how to deal with what we lose, but we are excellently taught how to achieve. But what happens when we lose what we have achieved?
And it also has an impact on your mental health, right? Elsie Mwangi, loss and grief therapist, and of course Winnie Nchogu. Thank you for being so candid about your journey. I'm sure many are listening to this conversation and saying I'm not alone, and today I know how best to actually take up this road of loss and grief. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Time now for the health tip.
The moment you strengthen the body, your mind definitely will get stronger. If you're able to hold a position for longer today than you did yesterday, definitely, mostly it's not the physical limitations we have, it's what we tell ourselves in our mind. Yeah, so yoga helps you come out from the limiting thoughts, I can't do this, I'm not too flexible, yoga is not for me, yeah? And once you get on your mat and practice yoga, we modify the practice for you definitely.
Loss and grief is difficult for many of us and more difficult for others, but today we learned how we can be able to cope, and if it is not possible to do it on your own, seeking help is prudent. My name is Gladys Gashanja. This